On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, container rates spike again. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So I attended a meeting last month where I was told by a government official that the impact the Houthi are having on global shipping is not manifesting itself. We're not seeing a spike in freight rates. We're not seeing delays. We're not seeing the impact, and therefore the Houthi are not impacting global shipping. And I disagreed vehemently with this because I can't keep my mouth shut. It's a big problem of mine. I've voiced in there, I said, listen, yes, you saw the initial spike in freight rates go up, and then it came on the decline, and that's what they were referring to. But now it is back climbing again. Why? Because the impact in global shipping is not always immediate. There are long-term impacts. And what we're seeing right now are those long-term impacts taking hold, and they're going to be hard to shake. We're going to look at those impacts. What does it mean for you, the consumer, the shipper, the carrier out there? What's the forecast going forward, and is this the norm we're going to see happening? If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So this story over in Container News, Megamax fleet now forms half of global box ship fleet. So Megamax ships are those over 18,000 TEU. A TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. Most containers carried on ships are 40 foots. That's basically 2 TEUs. But 18,000 TEU was the magic number that was introduced by Maersk with the Triple E class back in 2013. Alphaliner tracks all the world's container ships, and you'll see out there right now that container ships are capable of carrying 29.8 million TEU, almost 30 million TEU afloat. And if you look at the growth of the Megamax fleet as per Alphaliner, it started back in 2013 with Maersk, but now over 5 million TEUs are carried on board these vessels. And so that when these ships are impacted and they have to sail longer routes, that has a disproportionate impact on global shipping rates. This is marine traffic. Marine traffic tracks all the world ships. I've cleaned this up to just show you container ships. So this is the location of all the world's container ships. Now we're going to change this around a little bit and just look at those Megamax ships. We're going to go for ships just over 18,000 TEU, and you can see where they're located between Asia, coming through Singapore, the Malacca Straits, heading southwest through the Indian Ocean, bypassing, the Bab el-Mandab, take your drink, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden. Some are heading up into the Persian Gulf, but most of them are heading around the southern tip of Africa, heading over here to the big terminals at Tangier and Algeciras. Some are heading into the Mediterranean, and others are heading up to northern Europe. They don't go across the Pacific. They don't go across the Atlantic to the U.S. because U.S. ports can't handle them. I did a whole video on this, which I'll link above so you can take a look at. But this has an undue proportion because these ships are going to avoid the Red Sea. The Houthi are continuing their levels of attack. Matter of fact, we just saw this week attacks supposedly on 6 ships in the Red, Arabian, and Mediterranean seas. Now, while some of these attacks have not been confirmed, especially the one in the Mediterranean, they have hit vessels in and around the area. This is the bulk carrier Lax, Majuro flagged, heading southbound in the Red Sea. It was hit by a soon-to-be almost 5 missiles. You can actually see 2 hits on the side of the vessel here, one about halfway down the port side and the other aft on the port side, and you'll see the vessel is leaving a trail there. That is part of the bulk cargo. This is either carrying grain or fertilizer on board the vessel, and the ship was hit right along the waterline. That's the reason it has that port list to it. And then here is the hatch cover. Missile came in through the hatch. You can see that the hatch is blown out. You can see the peeling here. I don't believe this was a full detonation of the missile. We've seen this before on previous attacks. This is probably the missile penetrating the hatch and then probably the fuel from the missile exploding, not the warhead. Again, the Houthi are either not very good with their weapons or they're not charging the weapons. We're not sure which. But what makes this attack even more unusual for me is this. This is a French press release, which I ran through Google Translate for you, talking about it. Attack on the bulk carrier Lax on Wednesday, May 29, 2024. The cargo ship Lax, flying the Marshall Islands flag and bound for Iran, was the victim of a complex attack from Yemen in the Red Sea. The Houthi are the wildy coyote of villains out there. They attack any ship. They don't care. They say that they're targeting ships that are dealing with Israel, with the United States, with Great Britain. They just hit a ship carrying cargo to Iran. Again, wily coyote of pirates are the Houthi. Just want to get that in there. So these attacks are causing the congestion we're seeing in Asian ports. When you throw ships off a normal routine, container ships run on what's called a liner service. They have scheduled routes. They leave at certain times. They run those routes almost like airlines. When you throw them off, you start causing congestion and you start creating backlogs in ports, and cargo that's flowing in and out of the ports are all impacted. Trucks, rails, barges, feeder vessels, all of them start getting impacted. And you're seeing that across the board. And as long as this war continues, you're going to see this prolonged series of diversions around the Cape. And what this is manifesting itself into is longer route times, up to 39% on some Asia and Med routes. Sea Intelligence put this together. It's available through Container News. You can see it here that in the blue lines here, this is, for example, Northeast Asia to Eastern Med. You're talking about over 60% increased transit times. If you look in the yellow orange here, that's Asia to Northern Europe. So from Southeast Asia to the North Sea, you're seeing almost 30% increase. So this prolonged sailing time is creating the delays. And when you start throwing those off, you start causing the congestion. In Singapore, we're seeing nearly 2 million containers that are jammed in the port right now, waiting to get out. Matter of fact, you have some carriers who are bypassing Singapore, heading around Singapore, not going into the port and sailing directly to route. This is going to cause fueling issues too, because Singapore is one of the biggest bunkering ports out there. It's having an impact on some shippers more than others. India, its shippers and retailers are suffering in this wave of supply chain disruptions. India, who had been building a huge supply chain network with Europe, now has to send most of their cargo around Africa. That is 3 times longer than going through the Suez and the Red Sea. So India is suffering greatly. It's one of the reasons why we've seen the Indian Navy out in force dealing with Houthi attacks, along with the fact that Indian crew members are one of the most common you see on ships. You're also having higher consumption in China because U.S. is contributing to this rate spike. So as consumption is increasing in China and the U.S., we're seeing that kind of tick up. So there's an increased demand. That means there's more cargo being dumped on ships. They have to sail longer distances. And this is manifesting themselves. This is from Descartes tracking the number of U.S. TEUs, again, 20-foot equivalent units that are coming into the United States. And for 2024, you see that increase going on. It's paralleling the responses we saw back in 2023, back in 2019, back in 2020. This is a period when we saw those kind of increases happening. And 2024 really finds itself in its own little new area here between what was the pre-COVID and the COVID years. So we're still trying to figure out COVID. That's another issue we have in terms of consumer buying. What is the new norm that is out there? Because not everybody has returned back to work. At the same time, there is a finite number of containers out there, and you've got to get containers into the right place at the right time. And now that is impossible. So this is almost like a shell game of moving containers. People don't understand when all of a sudden you had the diversions out of around Africa, out of the Red Sea. Those empty containers are not getting back to Asia to be refilled. And when you slow down those empty containers getting in, you slow the entire process. But that takes months for it to manifest. That's why we're seeing it now. Even though this started back in December, you're seeing it now because we're getting into the second cycle of rotations with containers now, and containers are not showing up. Remember, containers are built almost exclusively in China, and everyone slowed down container production because of the slowdown from the post-COVID supply chain crisis. We had too many containers, and so everybody slowed down container production and took old containers out of service. And now we don't have enough containers, and since China builds 80% of the containers and they lease almost all the containers, containers, that's a problem. The container liners got rid of their own containers back in the early 2000s during the economic recession of 2008. They basically sold off that business, and now it's container lessors that lease those containers out. Then you have one of my favorite stories. The shippers are fury as spot rates soar and box lines ignore contracts. So container liners have this unique thing. About 70% of the cargo that goes on ships comes on ships based on long-term contracts. So big shippers get long-term contracts. IKEA, Walmart, you name them, the big box stores, all those companies have it. And even smaller companies that run maybe 20, 30 boxes a year will go in and get their, rates ironed out early in the year. By January 1st, that's the Asia to Europe. By May 1st, it's Asia to America routes. They're all done. However, when rates begin to spike, and the chart you'll see here is of spot rates going up, container liners want to book that cargo as quickly as they can and make sure it gets on the ship because they want to make the money, because they make a percentage off that freight rate. So the higher the freight rate, the more money they make. So they're literally bumping long-term contracts off vessels so that they can fit the short-term higher rate vessels on. This happened during the supply chain crisis. As a matter of fact, there's a whole series of cases right now before the Federal Maritime Commission about this, about the fact that shippers did this and impacted businesses. As a matter of fact, Bed Bath & Beyond is making the argument that one of the reasons they went bankrupt was because of the actions of some of the container liners. So this is the Drury index showing you key trade routes out of Shanghai, the route to Rotterdam, to LA, to Genoa, to New York. So when you look at these, this is the Genoa one. This is the most expensive because, again, you have to go into the Mediterranean. It peaked back on January 25th at around $6,300, $6,365. That's up from almost $2,000. Came back down to about $3,600, but now back up again. And the one that's the longest right now is the Shanghai to New York. This is the route that goes across the Pacific through the new lane of the Panama Canal. Now, you can't use one of those Megamax ships for this. You have to use a Panamax ship for this. But that one is spiking again. We're starting to see that route take back off because we're getting water in the Panama Canal, increased transits through the Panama Canal, so there's more cargo being diverted that way, and so we're seeing the spike in rates. And so again, if you're looking at post-Houthi attacks, well, yeah, it looks good. The rates are all coming down. Everything looks like it's getting better. It's going to stabilize, but now what we're seeing is the long-term impacts have taken hold. Now, there is some good news on the horizon that these May rates may be masking the looming capacity bomb. We're seeing new ships coming online at a marked faster rate than ever before. Container companies bought ships at record numbers during the supply chain crisis. If you look at this story, despite the fact that already 1.14 million TEUs of new capacity have been delivered this year, so far the members of the 3 mega alliances, this is the large container companies, 9 of the 10 largest container companies are in alliances. They lack 36 ships to fully staff their 25 Asia-Europe loops as of 10 May. It goes on down here that the Red Sea diversions, should the Red Sea diversions end this month and Suez Canal transits resume, the carriers would have around 45 vessels of an average size of 14,000 TEUs. The Alphaliner analyst said there would be a large overcapacity if the Red Sea gets solved. However, that is not expected to happen soon. Carriers have finally restructured their networks with new rotations in the view of the Cape routings. So even if tomorrow the Houthis say, you know what, we're done, everything, there's peace in the Middle East, everything is solved, it's going to take a while to reset everything. And then you're going to have disruptions on the back end of this too, because everything's going to have to be retooled, restructured. You're going to have too much capacity. Container liners will start scrapping and selling vessels like crazy. So this norm is going to be here with us for a while, even if everything gets better in the Middle East, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. Very much like we saw when we had the 109 ships off LA and Long Beach, you're seeing other carriers jump into this trade because of the peak in rates. Ellerman City Liner, which is a UK-based container firm, is announcing a China to UK service for peak season. They see the opportunity. They don't have long-term contracts. They're trying to grab these spot charters. They're trying to grab these high-value spot charters right now so that they can move cargo and make a quick profit. It's also impacting other sectors. This is over at Lloyd's list. This is James Baker. Disruptions continue to drive tanker demand. Crude and product tanker sectors are benefiting from increased ton miles, says BIMCO. This story over at Sea Trade Maritime, 5-year-old Suezmax tanker, Suezmax is a ship that can just get through the Suez Canal, is now worth more than a new building. While containers invested in building new tonnage like crazy during 2020 to 2022, when they were flush with cash, remember they were making huge profits. They bought ships. When you buy ships when you have money on your hands, you don't put them under long-term build leases. Well, tanker companies have not done that for years. And so there's a tanker shortage, particularly clean tankers and smaller crude-sized tankers. And that means that what tonnage is out there is extremely valuable. Plus, you have anywhere from 400 to 800 ships that have been gobbled up to take part in the parallel trade fleet, the dark fleet, the gray fleet, hauling Russian oil, basically. That's been cut out, and that's operating in a separate service. So tanker market is seeing this increase equally with the container firms. And then last little bit here is that we're seeing disruptions due to the Red Sea are driving up carbon emissions. So the International Maritime Organization has been on a huge effort to clean up the global shipping industry, to reduce carbon emissions. But when you're sailing an additional 5,000 miles around Africa and you have to speed up to make your transits, you are dumping more and more carbon emissions into the air, meaning that all the effort at it trying to be more efficient is not working. Add to it, some companies have shifted over to fuels, LNG, liquefied natural gas, green methanol. You have to have that fuel staged at ports to load it. And if you're sailing a longer distance, you may need to refuel on the way, especially if you're bypassing Singapore. So that means, does Cape Town have the fuel? Does Algeciras and Tangier have it at the mouth of the Mediterranean? Do the European ports have it? Do the American ports have them? South America, Middle East? Where are you getting this fuel? This is driving up all those costs. And granted, when you see, if you have a 40-foot container full of shoes, you're not going to see a massive spike in the transportation cost. You're just not. It's going to be in pennies, maybe $1 or so per shoe. You're not going to see a massive spike. But it's the cumulative effect you have to look at. If that container is getting laid into a port, there's detention and demurrage charges. You may not have the truck, the rail, the barge, the small vessel, the connector to move that cargo. That's going to incur costs associated with it. There'll be surcharges for the longer mileage you're sailing, fuel charges, you name it. It is a cumulative effect that you start seeing this. And then if you have large bulky items that you're shipping, furniture is one of the best examples of that, you see a much larger spike all of a sudden in the cost of transportation. This is a cumulative effect, and we're seeing it not just in the container sector, but we're seeing it in the oil sector. We're seeing it in car carriers. We're seeing it in bulk trade now. So this is starting to impact everything. If you look at the latest statistics from IMF on the Red Sea, what we're seeing is a 2/3 reduction in the number of ships sailing through the region and a 3/4 reduction in tonnage going through the region. And you are not going to go back to the Red Sea as long as the Houthi are staging attacks like they just did on Lax. Because if I have a Megamax container ship, that ship carries maybe $1 billion worth of cargo. Back in 2013, we had a ship sink, the MOL Comfort. MOL Comfort was an 8,000 TEU ship. Again, Megamax is 18,000, 10,000 more containers. That ship, when it sank, the value of that cargo over a decade ago was $250 million. So it is not a far stretch to think that some of these Megamax container ships are carrying over $1 billion worth of cargo. And if you have to pay 1% war risk insurance on a $1 billion ship, that's a bit of money you're paying. That's $10 million you're paying. If you sail around Africa, that's an extra $1 million in fuel. You're avoiding $500,000 to $750,000 in tolls going through the Red Sea. You're going to take that route every day of the week. What makes this even more profitable for the ocean liners is that they're building these Megamax ships. And if you're going to haul cargo over a longer distances, then the bigger the ship, the better. And 24,000 TEU, which is restricted by the size of the Suez Canal, is no longer a restriction if you're heading around Africa. So we may start seeing longer ships that are being built now that carry more than 24,000 TEUs. I don't know if you see wider ships, because that would involve new gantry cranes, ship-to-shore cranes, but you may see longer ships. And if you make a ship longer than the now allowed 400 meters, because that's the Suez Canal restriction, well, you can start carrying maybe 28,000 TEUs, maybe 30,000 TEUs, and that's even more efficient. That's the impact that the Houthi are having. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon, where you can become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next video, Sal, signing off.